A $10 fine turned into a nightmare until my son, a special forces vet, stepped in. What happened next shocked everyone.
You won't believe how we took down the HOA. Welcome, everyone.
Before we dive into this epic story, I want to know, where are you watching from?
Drop your city or country in the comments below, and let's see how far this story travels. Now, grab some popcorn, because this one's going to get intense.
It was an ordinary Tuesday when the letter from the HOA arrived, its crisp white envelope glaring at me as it sat on the kitchen counter. The logo at the top, a stern reminder of the ever-watchful community, made my stomach tighten. I opened it slowly, feeling the weight of impending frustration. A $10 fine. For what? The garden fence in the backyard, which I had always kept tidy, was allegedly a few inches out of bounds.
How could they fine me for such a minor issue? I couldn't believe it. The fence had been there for years without any issues.
This was the first time I'd ever received a fine from the HOA, and it felt absurd. I immediately called the HOA office, hoping for some sort of misunderstanding.
The voice on the other end was cold, dismissive, and most importantly, unhelpful. The fine is for a violation of the community guidelines, she said, repeating the same line I'd read in the letter.
If you don't pay, further action will be taken. My frustration grew. This was ridiculous. A $10 fine over something so trivial.
There had to be more to this than they were letting on.
A few days passed, and the unease lingered.
The fine was still fresh in my mind, gnawing at me.
But what came next was even worse.
Another letter arrived, this time more stern in tone.
The HOA claimed that if I didn't pay the fine within 10 days, additional fines would be imposed.
Failure to comply with community regulations will result in escalating penalties, it read.
I was appalled. This wasn't just a fine, it was a threat. A threat over a $10 fee for a minor infraction that no one had ever even complained about before. Days passed, and the letters kept coming, each one more aggressive than the last, all filled with vague threats of legal action, more fines, and even the possibility of actionable steps. They made it clear that this minor violation was becoming a major issue in their eyes. I tried calling the HOA again, hoping for a human being who could provide some clarity.
But the responses I got were the same each time.
You need to pay the fine or face consequences. It felt like they were setting me up for failure, expecting me to cave under their pressure. I felt trapped.
All of a sudden, my home, the place where I had lived peacefully for years, was being turned into
a battleground. The $10 fine wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about feeling like a small cog in an unjust, inflexible machine.
It was a Thursday morning when the HOA sent a new set of security officers to my house.
The sound of their knock on the door startled me. 3 men dressed in dark uniforms stood on my porch with a clipboard in hand. They claimed they were here to inspect the property due to the unpaid fine.
I was speechless.
Inspect my property? Over a $10 fine? This was crossing a line. I stood my ground, refusing to let them in without proper documentation or proof of their authority.
They, of course, didn't take kindly to this.
The lead officer, a tall man with a stern expression, told me that if I didn't comply, the HOA would take legal action. You'll regret this if you don't cooperate, he threatened. At that moment, I felt a mix of anger and fear. My instinct was to close the door, but the situation felt more dangerous than it should have been. These people weren't just following rules, they were pushing boundaries, testing how far they could go.
My emotions were in turmoil.
How did a simple infraction become something so aggressive?
The fine had grown from a mere inconvenience into
an outright invasion of my rights. I made it clear that they had no right to inspect my property without a court order, but the officers remained unmoved.
The tension between us escalated until I felt like I couldn't handle it much longer.
That's when I heard the familiar hum of a car pulling into the driveway.
I couldn't believe my eyes.
It was my son, standing in the doorway.
I hadn't seen him in months.
He had just returned from his deployment overseas, and his timing couldn't have been better.
He had served in special forces for several years and had seen far worse situations than this.
His presence, calm and unwavering, immediately changed the dynamics of the entire confrontation. "Hey, what's going on here?" he asked, his voice steady, with a tinge of confusion but an underlying edge that made the officers pause. I explained everything quickly: the fine, the repeated threats, and now these men trying to force their way into our home. I could see his face harden with understanding. He had dealt with far more intense situations in the military, but seeing this unfold on his own home turf made him react in a way that I didn't expect.
Without saying a word, he stepped forward,
placing himself between the officers and me.
"I'm going to need you to explain exactly what's happening here," he said, his tone demanding.
His presence alone shifted the energy in the air. The officers seemed to hesitate, their confidence
suddenly gone. My son stood tall, his posture commanding authority.
The officers, once so sure of themselves, suddenly seemed to second-guess their actions. "Who are you?" one of them asked, though the question was more out of fear than curiosity. "I'm Special Forces," my son replied, his voice unwavering. "And I suggest you explain yourselves, or we'll be having a different conversation." It was like the air had changed. The officers, now realizing they were dealing with someone who had seen the worst of the worst, began to stammer. My son didn't raise his voice or get physically aggressive. He simply exuded confidence and control, and it was enough to make the officers question their course of action. He calmly began to ask about the legalities of their actions, pointing out that they couldn't just walk into someone's home without a court order or proper documentation. He cited laws on property rights and homeowner protections, making it clear that this was not a situation they could simply bully their way through. The lead officer's face went pale as he realized he had no solid ground to stand on. They had underestimated my son, and now they were scrambling for a way out.
My son didn't raise his voice once. He just spoke with quiet authority, quoting
laws and reminding them of their limits. The officers began exchanging nervous glances, clearly out of their depth.
After what felt like an eternity of silence, they muttered some weak apologies, collected their things, and turned to leave.
They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected my son to be there. "Take care of yourself, all right?"
my son said to me, his voice softening.
"This isn't over yet, but we've made a statement today."
As the officers drove off, I stood there with my son, watching them leave.
The sense of relief was overwhelming, but it was quickly followed by a simmering anger.
How had things escalated to this point?
A simple $10 fine had turned into a near-home invasion. We sat together on the porch, the cool evening air around us.
I couldn't help but feel grateful for my son's presence. Not just for saving me from the HOA's overreach, but for reminding me that sometimes you have to stand your ground.
Even when it seems like the system is stacked against you. "I'm proud of you," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you too, MOM," he said, his eyes softening.
Sometimes you have to show people that they can't push. You were round lot in the end. The fine was never paid.
The HOA never came back.
But more than that, I learned that it wasn't just about fighting a fine, it was about fighting for my dignity and the protection of my home.
And with my son by my side,
I knew that I could face anything.